In the Catholic Church, we used to have something called minor orders, which were porter, reader, exorcist, and acolyte. What were these minor orders? Why did the Church get rid of them? And how do they relate to the so-called major orders? When Jesus Christ established the new law, he entrusted to the Church 7 sacraments which are special mediations of his grace. While some of the sacraments, such as confession, can be repeated according to the needs of time and place, other sacraments imprint a permanent character upon the soul and can be performed only once, namely baptism, confirmation, and holy orders. Within holy orders, which confers the permanent priestly character upon the soul, there are 3 degrees of this sacrament, namely deacon, priest, and bishop. These 3 together are major orders, and they have existed in the Church since the time of the first bishops, the apostles. As St. Ignatius of Antioch, the first-century disciple of St. John, said, "See that you all follow the bishop even as Jesus Christ does the Father, and the presbytery as you would the apostles." The deacon is the helper of the priests and the bishops at the celebration of the Mass and the proclamation of the Gospel, but he in turn has historically been joined by other ministers. Over time, these ministers were formalized into the role of the aforementioned porter, reader, exorcist, and acolyte, as well as a surprise role that we'll come back to later. Seminarians seeking the priesthood would be installed in each of these roles sequentially before becoming a priest. Firstly, let's talk about the porter, or what is sometimes called the ostiary. In the Roman Empire, the porter was a slave who guarded the door of a house. The early Christians were forced to celebrate their liturgy in personal homes, but when they began to populate churches, the role of the porter came with them as the guardian of the entrance to the church and the one in charge of the doors. The reader or lector is the second rank within the minor orders, and its role is relatively self-explanatory. It was the function of the lector to read the scriptures during the liturgy, which meant that a lector had to be literate, which raised the academic barrier beyond that of a porter. At the third rank of the minor orders, we find the exorcist, which is probably the most famous of the minor orders, at least in function. Today, the exorcist's role, rather than being a separate office from priesthood, is a supplementary ministry granted by a bishop as the need arises. From the time of the Council of Carthage until the modern era, if a bishop was installing someone as an exorcist, he would say the words, "possess the power of imposing hands on energumens," which is an old-timey word for a demoniac or someone possessed. The fourth rank of minor orders is acolyte, at which point we are getting closer to actual priestly ministry, but still not there yet. The acolyte is honored by being able to prepare the water and wine for Mass and to light the candles upon the altar, making him proximate to the actual Eucharistic sacrifice. And when priests are lacking, the acolyte is supposed to be deputized to distribute the Eucharist, and takes precedence before resorting to the emergency role of extraordinary ministers chosen from among the ordinary laity. So now that you have a working knowledge of the minor orders and the major orders, let's return to our mystery ministry, which is the subdeacon, who has the right to carry the chalice as well as to prepare the materials for the Eucharistic sacrifice. The subdeacon is confusing for a couple reasons. Firstly, because theologians were divided about whether to consider the subdeacon part of the minor orders or the major orders. In the 1200s, however, Pope Innocent III officially categorized the subdeacon as a major order for the Western Church, while it remained a minor order in the East. But what's important to clarify here is that the subdeacon himself, even though he was added to the category of the major orders, did not receive holy orders, because the 3 ranks of the sacrament of holy orders are of divine origin, and the Church does not have the power to add to them, as noted by Cardinal Pietro Gaspari, the major contributor to the 1917 Code of Canon Law. What we've discussed so far was the state of the major and minor orders prior to 1972, but in 1972, Pope Paul VI decided to restructure the whole system of minor orders, making several major changes. Firstly, he eliminated the term minor orders and ordination, preferring to call the creation of these ministries an installation, to better distinguish those roles which are properly part of the sacerdotal priesthood instituted through holy orders, versus those proper to that common priesthood belonging to all baptized Christians. Secondly, Paul VI broadly suppressed the porter and the exorcists, making them no longer part of the universal offices of the Latin Church, and no longer part of the ordinary formation towards priesthood. But he did not eliminate them entirely, stating that if a bishop's conference had a particular need to establish these ministries again, there would be the option to do so. Thirdly, Paul VI absorbed the role of the subdeacon into that of lector and acolyte, the 2 surviving minor orders. He expressed it this way, saying, "The function heretofore assigned to the subdeacon are entrusted to the reader and the acolyte. Consequently, the major order of subdiaconate no longer exists in the Latin Church. There is, however, no reason why the acolyte cannot be called a subdeacon in some places, at the discretion of the Conference of Bishops. The fourth change was that the church would no longer consider entrance into the minor orders as part of what is called the clerical state, meaning that only those who were given holy orders would properly be called clerics, and the acquisition of the tonsure, which used to precede the minor orders and signal the clerical state, was generally abolished. After 1972, the ministries of lector and acolyte have remained, and still remain, stepping stones on a seminarian's journey towards priesthood, as well as for permanent deacons. But because the minor orders are now expressly formulated as a ministry directly connected to the common priesthood of all the faithful, belonging to both men and women, Pope Francis made further revisions to the practice when in 2021 he altered the Code of Canon Law to allow women to become lectors or acolytes. Additionally, Pope Francis formally added the ministry of catechist as an educator and witness to the faith, first mentioned by Pope Paul VI, but not directly put into practice. So in answer to the question, where did the minor orders go? In a certain sense, the answer is nowhere. Technically, you could still have the traditional 4 minor orders conferred given the right circumstances, and we've even added an extra ministry to the mix. But in practice, the minor orders have largely faded into obscurity in the popular understanding, as the lines between formalized ministry and something you just happen to be doing have become more blurred. And I think that's a shame because these offices are very cool and very ancient, dating back until 251 at the latest. I wish they were more widely known and specifically enumerated. In particular, I think it would be really fitting if we brought back the role of porter in our current day and age, because many churches have already started to have volunteer door guardians to protect against religiously targeted violence, and I think formally considering these people as porters would be a good way of honoring that function, if it hasn't been done already and I just haven't heard of it. If you want to learn more about the indelible character of priesthood, please check out my video on laicization, which I did last year.